Shabbat Shalom. The Passover Seder is often described as the oldest continuously observed religious ritual in the world. It has inspired the imagination of successive generations of Jews with its annually reenacted drama of slavery and liberation. We eat special symbolic foods like matzah, the unleavened bread that we call the bread of affliction, at the beginning of the Seder. But later we point out it also represents the bread of freedom that did not have time to rise because we left Egypt in haste. We eat maror, the bitter herbs that remind us of the bitterness of slavery. But at the same time, we eat a multi-course banquet fit for nobility as we recline on cushions in the fashion of the aristocracy of the ancient Greek culture. The Seder is a ritual performed not in the synagogue but at home, in the midst of family. But perhaps the most striking aspect of the evening is that from beginning to end, it is designed to engage and enthrall the mind of a child. This ritual meal was a creative expansion of the first Passover evening meal found in this morning's Torah portion. In chapters 12 and 13 of the book of Exodus that we read this morning, we read how Moses instructed the people what they were supposed to do the night before they were freed at last from the slavery of Egypt. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, in one of his commentaries on this portion, asks, "What would you speak about if you were in Moses' shoes?" This is like the moment in all of those movies about epic battles when the general of the outnumbered, under-equipped, heroic soldiers are about to go out to battle against a larger and superior force. The commander of the underdogs has to give an inspirational charge to his troops. We're going to win this fight, and we're going to have victory. The Israelites have been enslaved for generations. The Egyptians have an army that is second to none in the region. The Israelites must be inspired with strength and courage to face the perils that they are going to encounter at dawn. So what would you say to galvanize the troops? Perhaps you'd talk about freedom, the ability to exercise your God-given human free will at last. Perhaps you'd speak about the destination that lies ahead, the land flowing with milk and honey. Or perhaps you'd try to prepare them for the arduous journey that lay ahead, the march across the wilderness with all its dangers and hazards, lions, tigers, bears, oh my, also marauding bands of thieves and thugs. Any of these would have been a great speech by a great leader, but Moses did none of these things, and that's what made him unique. If you examine the text in Exodus carefully, you'll see that 3 times he reverted to the same theme: children, education, and a distant future. In the text it says, when your children ask you, what does this ceremony mean to you? In Exodus 12:26. Or on that day, tell your son, I do this because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt in 13:8. Or in days to come when your son asks you, what does this mean? In chapter 13, verse 14. In each case, the parents tell their children about our history and about our future. Moses does not so much talk about freedom, but rather about education. He fixed his vision not on the immediate, but on the distant future, not on the adults, but the children. And in so doing, he was making a fundamental point. It may be hard to escape from tyranny, but it's harder still to build and sustain a free society. To defend a country, you need an army, but to defend a civilization, you need education. And that's why Moses spoke about the duty of parents in every generation to educate their children about why freedom matters and how it was achieved. Freedom is not won by merely overthrowing a tyrannical ruler or an oppressive regime. Rabbi Sachs teaches us that it's usually only the prelude to a new tyranny, a new oppression. The faces change, but not the script. True freedom requires the rule of law and justice, a judicial system which the rights of some are not secured by the denial of rights to others. Freedom begins with what we teach our children, And that's why Jews became a people whose passion is education, whose heroes are teachers, and whose citadels are schools. Nowhere is this more evident than on Passover, when the entire ritual of handing on our story to the next generation is set in motion by the questions asked by a child. The rabbis were insistent that everyone at the Passover Seder is to be engaged in telling our story. We need to find a way to make the story personal and relevant to every single person sitting at the table. That's why the Haggadah grew to be so large, and the Seder came to be such a large production. Too long, perhaps, for many people. But that's because generation after generation felt the need to add something, a new way to tell the story, a new kitschy custom like face masks or finger puppets for the 10 plagues, Grandpa knocking on the door dressed up as Elijah the prophet, various funny songs and poems that tell our story and convey a moral message. Every generation found a new way to engage the guests at the table. But there's always been a special emphasis on keeping the children interested and curious, like having young children ask the 4 questions, or playing the parts of the 4 children at the Seder, searching for afikomen at the end of the meal, learning hand gestures or making funny noises during Chad Gadya, or who knows when, watching Elijah's cup to see if the wine is diminished when we open the door. They even used to serve a kind of popcorn during the Seder, believe it or not, because that was considered a delicious treat for kids. So it's especially appropriate this morning that we read about the original Seder in Egypt, the meal before the great Exodus, the ceremony that especially focused on children asking questions and demonstrating a curiosity about the meaning of freedom and the faith and traditions of our people. Because this morning, we have Dennis Sheps celebrating his 2nd bar mitzvah, and his daughter Melissa celebrating her 1st, and several grandchildren celebrating with them. This is literally a celebration of Lador Vador, from generation to generation, the passing on of our story and the teachings of our people from one generation to the next. Last night, Diane and I had several guests for Shabbat dinner at our home. That is another Jewish tradition that affords us the opportunity to pass along our values and our traditions. But Shabbat is a weekly opportunity, and that can be just as powerful as the Passover Seder. The Passover Seder is very elaborate, and because we only do it once or actually twice a year with the 2 Seders, it's often very memorable. But Shabbat comes every single week, and there's a tremendous power in weekly rituals that are constant reminders of our obligations to care for each other and the world around us. Shabbat is a weekly opportunity to build family and community relationships. And Shabbat is founded on twin themes, creation and redemption. In the book of Exodus, as we're going to read in 2 weeks, the commandment to remember the Sabbath day is based on the story of creation in Genesis. For in 6 days God created the heavens and the earth, and on the 7th day God rested. So God has commanded us to do our creative work 6 days a week, but then we are to rest on the Shabbat, on the 7th day. We're to stop trying to fix the world and make it better with our human creative acts. 1 day a week, we're just supposed to sit back and enjoy the world as it is, to stop and smell the roses, to marvel at the wonders of nature. But in Deuteronomy, where the 10 Commandments are repeated, the commandment to observe the Sabbath day is based not on creation, but on redemption, because God took us out of slavery in Egypt. We are now free people, and free people are entitled to take a day off once a week. We are masters of our calendar, our holidays, and the days of our lives. We're able to celebrate freedom 1 day a week. The Sabbath itself is a reminder of the Exodus from Egypt, as we declare every Friday night at Kiddush. The paramount value of human freedom and dignity is an essential teaching of Jewish faith. It is the foundation of what we try to demonstrate at the Passover Seder, as well as the weekly reminder we share at our Sabbath tables. It is something we need to constantly teach and internalize for ourselves and our children, for our family, and for our community. Shabbat Shalom.